So good morning to you, my dear friends. This clearly wasn't an original part of the schedule. A small mix-up last night or yesterday kind of brings me before you this morning to share with you a few thoughts about Pope Francis's decision to refer to a chapter in his book he wrote on ecology, integral ecology, Laudato Si. Second chapter is about the gospel of creation. So that's briefly what I'd like to share some brief thoughts with you about. And do it in such a way that I can get out of the way in, 25 minutes, 20 minutes or so. So, my dear friends, gathered here for a climate summit like this just means that we're certainly not the first group to be concerned about the climate or its summit. There are a lot of such movements. In fact, from here in July, we'll be addressing a similar theme in Stockholm, and then subsequently also in Germany. But as you know, the outburst of ecological consciousness and interest that characterized and began in the 1970s found expression in various forms in universities, on the level of the United Nations, and in several other academic institutions. In universities, like, since we're here in St. Louis, on universities, new departments began, which bore the title of, Department of Integral Ecology, Department of Human Ecology, and so on. The thing was that the sense of something like Department of Human Ecology wasn't always clear. For some, Department of Human Ecology was to study the impact of the human person on the environment and to see how that can be corrected. For some, it also meant, in terms of evolutionist theology, evolutionist thinking, also the survival of the human person in the environment in which he or she may find himself or herself. Shortly thereafter, after all of this, came Rio 20, at which the United Nations began to also formulate some positions about the United Nations' own response to everything that was happening to the environment. The church, incidentally, had just preceded the United Nations in its concern about the ecology and about our environment. And so Pope John Paul II, as was just briefly been recalled here this morning, began to make reference to the ecology and drew attention to the fact that we cannot meaningfully talk about natural ecology without also paying attention to human ecology, that the two must go hand in hand. So all of that developed, and this morning I'm just here to share some few thoughts about, from the point of view of Pope Francis, who took all what his predecessors had talked about in ecology. When he put them all together, he spoke about integral human ecology. At the time of Pope Francis, we do not only have natural ecology, nor simply natural and human ecology, but Pope Benedict had already also begun to talk about social ecology and ecology of peace. So putting all of that together, integral ecology for Pope Francis meant all of these: natural ecology, human ecology, social ecology, and ecology of peace. All of that is what Pope Francis wrote about in this encyclical. Now, in this encyclical, Laudato Si, Pope Francis adopts the very popular, common method in church, a lot of church writing about see, judge, and act. So the encyclical follows that layout. And so after a foreword, a first chapter begins with an analysis of the current ecological environmental situation. And so that is the scene, what the situation is like. And then he goes into the second part about judging. And he precedes his analysis of the current situation with a chapter on the gospel of creation. So he precedes the analysis or evaluation of the challenges before he goes to talk about what action can be taken, he precedes all of that with what he calls the gospel of creation. Now, when he begins this talk about gospel of creation, he says that, what is the point? Writing an encyclical, which I desire everybody, Catholic and non-Catholic, will pick up to read, why should I particularly be interested in beginning with something that is characteristically Christian or Catholic? So the gospel of creation. And so then justifies that by saying that the complexity and enormity of the situation, so climate and global crisis, is such that we should be open to all kinds of traditional forms of wisdom from different sectors. So these can come together in a kind of a dialogue or conversation, discover together the solution to the problem. So with that justification, then he goes into the presentation of his gospel of creation, which is what I like to talk about this morning. Now, from what he said, the enormity of the situation means that we should make room for all points of view, all forms of thinking. We should all think together, reason together, discuss views together, bring together the riches of our own particular traditions with view to finding a solution. But he could simply then have gone into contributing the church's, thinking about this. But calling this gospel of creation is very, very unique and particular. Gospel is a particular literary genre. When you refer to something as gospel, you're not simply talking about just any contribution. Gospel in Christian literature just means the announcement of divine intervention, which is experienced by humanity as good news, and which just challenges humanity then to a line of action and commitment in view of what God has done. So it is the announcement of some great things that God has done, a great act on the part of God, which benefits humanity, and so which invites us to commit, following this big experience of what God has done, to what it is. So that's why Pope Francis decides to invite us to consider in this. And so the gospel of creation is essentially a presentation of what God has done in creation. And this invitation is to recognize the fact that God the Father in creation has intervened personally in a very loving way in creating things around us, including the human person. So this is the particular and unique contribution of Pope Francis in this chapter. So creation then, with Pope Francis, creation then is seen as something which just didn't happen, but is a fruit of God's decided action. It's something that God contemplated, reflected upon, and decided to work on. So creation then is an act of God. And as an act of God, everything that happened in creation, therefore, has a purpose. And when everything in creation has a purpose, then we do not just think about the elements of creation anyhowly, but we need to recognize the purpose with which God created all of these. And it's essentially twofold. If creation is an act of God, then, like Pope Benedict, who preceded Pope Francis, the first chapters of the book of Genesis, which says that when God was creating, he said, let there be light. Pope Benedict says, it's not just let there be light, but it was also let there be love. God created everything that exists out of love to share his nature with everything else that exists. So creation then is a work not simply of divine action, but also expression of God's love. When that is the case, then our consideration of everything that exists begins to change. The character begins to be different. So beginning with nature, creation itself. If creation then is an act, a divine act, out of God's love, expression of his goodness, then it means that we must see in creation something more than the elements that just do exist. It was for nothing that Pope Francis took the name of St. Francis. St. Francis in the Franciscan tradition is somebody who related with everything around him in such a way that he began to call elements brothers and sisters and mother and all of that. Everything was positively connected to the human existence of St. Francis. And Pope Francis reflects the same. And so in creation then, we're invited to consider everything that exists as the work of God. Therefore, creation just didn't happen. It's with a purpose. It's a purpose that invites us, for example, to remember a passage in the book of Isaiah chapter 45, that God did not create the world to be chaos, but he created the world to be lived in. So if the purpose of creation was to prepare a home for the human family, then that's the nature of creation, a preparation of a home for a human family. God did not create the world to be chaos, but create the world to be lived in. So everything that exists then was a preparation of an ordered system to receive human life. Therefore, sometimes the reference to creation as cosmos is very significant. We have a lot of ladies in this room. You know cosmetics. And you know what you do with cosmetics. It's something you decorate your face with. When you put things in an orderly fashion, then there's beauty. And when there's order, there's always beauty. So cosmos then is the ordered arrangement of systems so that it's beautiful, it's ordered, and it can therefore support human life. That is cosmos for us. So God, with his word, created an ordered cosmos to receive human life. The second thing about creation then is that we need to then go into two forms of change of our minds. Creation then is not a divinized or divine element or divine structure, as we know from antiquity and even currently in some traditional societies, which consider creation, the world around us, in terms of divine structures and all. Creation is not divinity, it's not divine. It's the product of God, a sign of his gift, and therefore a gift of God for humanity. Secondly, if creation is a gift of God for humanity, then it's also not something that is maintained simply by technical and technological structures. It is something that is maintained actually by divine purpose, which we then invited to consider. The second, they say, that's the first thing. Creation then needs to be understood as in the terms of, the book of Genesis talks about creation as a garden. And a garden is an ordered system, a place that is taken care of so that human life can exist. The imagery garden is very significant. We know what gardens are. When we fail to take care of gardens, they become wilderness. And creation was not created as such. It was created as a garden. So well cared for place so that human life can exist and thrive. That's what creation is. The second element in there is also about the human person. That's the next thing to be created by God. And according to the scriptures, which the Pope refers to as therefore the gospel of creation, the human person was created in the image and the likeness of God. Therefore, with a particular sense of dignity. We here in St. Louis, there, probably in the School of Philosophy, there may be, a discussion, a place for, history of theological thought or historical thinking and all. One of the things that is worth looking at is, this sense of dignity. Where does it come from? In ancient Rome, dignity was applied to Roman emperors who returned victorious from battle. And their victory was a demonstration of their dignitas. So every emperor returning victorious from battle was supposed to have proven his dignitas. And it took the Christian thinkers, Ambrose and Augustine and co., to turn this upside down and to apply this dignitas to a human person by reason of his creation in the image and the likeness of God. So dignitas then does not refer to a display of valor and bravery in battle, but it now refers to the fact that every human person, by reason of his creation in the image and likeness of God, is worthy of dignity, is worthy of respect. When that is the case, if the human person is so created there to be a source of dignity, then it just calls also for a particular respect. Respect for every human person because it was created in a form of dignity. As a result of that, the subsequent creation of humanity as brothers or brotherhood, Cain and Abel, simply then invites us to consider brotherhood or fraternity as a context of the human family. If brotherhood was a context of the human family, so human family meant to be tied in a relationship of brotherhood, then the killing, for example, of Abel becomes fratricide, and not as any murder, but a fratricide, the killing of a brother, which actually diminishes the rest of humanity. The second thing about God having created the human person in his own image and likeness is the establishment of a three-level relationship. Our relationship with God, with our fellow human being, and with creation of the world or the garden in which we live. So our life is bound or determined by a threefold relationship. Our relationship with God, with one another as brothers, and then with creation. And this relationship then, when it is properly lived, is justice. In which case, justice is actually the respect for the demands of the relationship in which we live. When anybody respects the demands of the relationship in which he or she lives, then he is just and righteous. When anyone abuses or disregards the demands of the relationship in which one lives, then he is unjust. This is the typical biblical language for the sinner, for the unjust, and for the wicked. It's one who disregards the demands of the relationship in which he or she lives. And when one respects the demands of the relationship in which he or she lives, then that's his or her righteousness or her justice. So the threefold relationship which guides and directs our lives on earth are all understood in terms of justice. And so when we just towards God, we just towards a brother, we just towards the creation. And when we are unjust towards one, sooner or later we become unjust also towards the other three elements. So this is the content of the Pope's talk about a gospel of creation. This is how he invites us to understand human existence on earth in terms of this justice. Later on, he will introduce a talk then about our right to everything that God created in terms of universal destination of the goods of the earth. But that comes up later. So this is what Pope Francis is inviting us to do in this encyclical, to recognize when he calls for a gospel of creation, this is what he means. He is inviting us to recognize that if creation is the work of God, then there is a truly religious and spiritual significance to everything that exists, which can also then direct and guide our own relationship towards everything that exists, towards creation, and towards its support for humanity. In regard to that, when the book of Genesis talks about the creation of the human person, Adam, and was entrusted to the garden, and then the words used, keep and till it and have dominion over creation. This, for Pope Francis, has been misconstrued a little bit in the history of Christian thinking. Dominion of Adam, or dominion of humanity over creation, does not imply a servile treatment of creation or everything that exists. Dominion over creation is not to use elements in creation at will to serve our purpose and need. In fact, if the expression used was to keep and to till, the Hebrew word was lishmol. And to understand what this really means, we cast our mind back into when Cain killed his brother, and God came and said, where is your brother? The response of Cain was, am I my brother's keeper? The same word, lishmol. So if the relationship between brothers is presented in terms of keeping lishmol, then when God asks Adam or the human person to keep the earth, then it's almost to treat the earth as if it's a brotherly relationship. So the relationship between the human person and creation is not one of dominion and servile treatment of everything that exists to serve, humankind's need and all. But it's a call to a very loving relationship, concern and care, if you want, compassion for everything that exists. So this is the sense of humanity's relationship with the earth and creation. Over the years, this has been the thing. Creation was entrusted to man, therefore, the human person can use it anyhowly. Pope Francis is saying that's not the way. That's not the sense of this expression in creation. Rather, in Laudato Si, therefore, the Pope decidedly departs from the use of a particular expression which we were used to, applying to our relationship, to creation. We used to talk about stewardship of creation. Okay, stewardship of creation sometimes entails a very kind of, blood kind of relationship, towards, you use the word anyhowly, just that you show some concern. So in this encyclical Laudato Si, Pope Francis uses the word stewardship only twice. In the rest of the presentations of the relationship of the human person to creation, he uses the word care. As if that's more compassionate, that's more loving, and then that expresses more something from the heart. So the title of the book is Care for Our Common Home. That's what he invites us to do, to care for our common home. It's not simply exercise of stewardship, but it's exercise of care, compassionate care for our common home in tenderness. Because he believes that God created everything that exists in love and in tenderness. And human beings entrusted with creation are meant also to respect and to replicate this relationship with creation in love and in tenderness. So that's what the Pope invites us to do with creation, to develop and maintain a relationship of love and care and love and tenderness to everything that exists. It just means that when we so lovingly treat creation, then creation also supports and lovingly treats our life. The other thing that to observe with regard to creation and our relationship with it is in terms of the resources of creation and its ability to support human life under all its forms. This, again, is an issue that comes out strongly these days in the talk about creation, especially the climate and all of that. The question is being put, can creation support any volume of population at any time in the history of humanity, or we should also have policy to control and to maintain a certain level of the rise and growth of creation because of the limited resources of creation. Pope Francis thinks that creation of the world having been designed to support human existence has the wherewithal to be able to absorb and to take care of human family in all its forms. Of course, this does not mean irresponsible whatever treatment of creation and the growth, whatever. I remember his last visit to the Philippines. When somebody asked me about birth rate and whatever, his observation was that he uses an expression which later on was, he was badly attacked for that and so changed it. Actually, he used the expression in the interview that we should not breed like rabbits. Okay, and later on when people say, but I have a lot of children like that, whatever, so that expression was kind of not used anymore. But so that was so we, due responsibility in our productive system is required as much as trust also in the ability of creation, if we treat it respectfully, to also support the type of human life entrusted to it. By way of concluding quickly, and for where we are, in the last but one paragraph in Laudato Si, in this gospel of creation, Pope Francis talks about how everything that God created was meant to support human life in all its forms and in all its ways. So that leads the Pope to get into the issue of poverty and the distribution of resources and the ability of the resources of the earth to support human life on earth. In getting into that, the Holy Father cites or begins with a principle that already was begun by Pope Leo XIII in the first social encyclical of the Church, Rerum Novarum, about new things. This encyclical was developed in the age, on the age of industrialization, and that was to safeguard the nature of workers in those early ages and all of that. Rerum Novarum talks about enshrines a principle of capital, the right for people to have capital, to own capital and all. But that encyclical also goes on to say people's freedom and right to have capital is so that they can freely decide to exercise the responsibility of making their capital help their brothers in need. So, two formulations. Yes, people have right to own, to have capital, to own things for themselves, but then it is so that they can also freely decide or freely decide to, in their free responsibility, to use whatever they have to help a brother in need. So two things. And the Pope refers to this and therefore would say that the Catholic Church has always believed this. It always believed that capital is not an absolute. It's not an absolute entity or absolute term, but it's something that is always considered, conditioned by the responsibility to help the neighbor or the responsibility to help those around you. So yes, people have a right to capital, but so are people also invited and challenged to use their capital for the well-being of also the neighbor. This is how the Pope then formulates the universal destination of the goods of the earth. So the goods of the earth need to be used in such a way that everybody can have access to it, that the goods of the earth satisfy and support the life of everybody living on earth. It becomes, therefore, the establishment of a relation between capital and the responsibility to freely support or to help the neighbor. This is how the Pope formulates this chapter about the gospel of creation. Again, the choice of the literary genre, gospel, is first and foremost to invite us, in looking at creation, to recognize that creation is the great and loving work of God. And because creation is a loving work of God, that's what makes it possible to talk about a gospel. It's a deed of God for the well-being of humanity. And this is the sense of gospel. A great work that God has done for the benefit, for the good, and for the love of humanity. And therefore, the invitation is, when we look in there for our creation, it is not to look and to treat creation as if it's something that doesn't have an ownership. That's something that doesn't have a purpose. It's something that doesn't have a goal. But it's a well-designed and well-planned system to support human life. And this must become the parameters in which our discussion about what we do with creation, and in this light also its climate, goes. So I want to thank you for this quick overview of everything, because beyond by 5 minutes, right, already. So I want to thank you for your kind attention for this and for the space that you've created for me to share these few thoughts with you. Thank you.